I had always revered Berklee. A lot of musicians and artists don't fully realize it. They are one of the biggest resources we have for opening minds and hearts and getting people to care about each other. What I think we're unique at is to teach you to do the thing that hasn't been done yet, and you be the pioneer of that, which is going to help you have a stronger, more important career. It just strikes me that we negate our own history and our own needs if we don't honor the arts. This is everything I want to do. It's music, it's culture, because we have kids from 101 different countries here. It's entrepreneurship, and it really has a lot to do with racial equality and giving a voice to people who in this country have historically not had one. So not only do you have the multicultural aspects of all these other countries, but especially in Boston, we're probably the most racially diverse place in the city. We want to be the place that encourages and attracts the super creative person, gives them the tools, and helps them launch a career.
Hello, this is Chuck from Above the Basement, Boston Music and Conversation. Berklee College of Music in Boston is one of the premier music schools in the world. We have talked with many fantastic Berklee grads, including the folks from Honeysuckle, Ripe, Alison, Keslow, and Matt McArthur, to name just a few, as well as musicians and Berklee professors Bonnie Hayes and Susan Cattaneo. We wanted to talk with the man who has helped make this school the institution it is today, so we jumped at the chance to speak with drummer, humanitarian, entrepreneur, and Berklee president Roger Brown. Roger has had a prolific career, including co-directing one famine relief program called Land Bridge on the Cambodia-Thailand border, which was the largest emergency food distribution effort ever attempted, and another called Save the Children in the Sudan. Later, he co-founded Bright Horizons Family Solutions, which provides on-site child care for companies, and is also the founder of the Horizons Initiative, which provides services for homeless children, and the Bright Horizons Foundation for Children, which creates play spaces in homeless shelters. Mr. Brown became president of Berklee College of Music in 2004. We sat with Roger in a performance classroom at 1140 Boylston Street and talked about his humanitarian efforts, Berklee goals for its current and future students, how they prepare students for a successful career, and why music is so important. So here is our conversation with Roger Brown, recorded at Berklee College of Music in Boston, Massachusetts. You know, this is my first time in this building since 1989. I came here for a couple semesters, and I did really well, but I left. What I was telling Alan before is you have to eat, breathe it here. You can't half-ass it.
Yeah.
I just wasn't in a place where I could do that. Now, I had always wanted to go to Berklee growing up, and I was psyched to be able to actually do that. I was also saying I probably couldn't even get in today because it's a little more strenuous to get in.
Yeah. But
the facilities here, they were nice back then, but nothing like they are today.
Have you gotten a tour and seen some of the new stuff? Did you see the studios in the basement?
No. They had actually just opened up the production studio the year before I got there.
If you got 10 minutes, get Alan to take you over there and show you those studios.
Really?
That's really the pièce de résistance of the whole building.
The recording studios?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
There are 10 in the basement of 160.
Okay, yeah, you didn't have
including a scoring stage that can handle maybe 60 pieces, 2 Neve consoles. It's pretty stunning.
It was like a brand new thing when I got here, that production major.
Yeah.
And it's become a huge,
kind of our calling card now.
That's amazing. And so I never got to actually continue that process. Yeah. But the facilities are amazing, and especially with the addition of the Boston Conservatory down the street. Berklee's everywhere now.
Doing our best.
There's no question there.
It's been 14 years for you now.
Yep, I was a young man when I came here.
And I also saw that video that you made. You talk about the challenges that face musicians, and you gave Esperanza Spalding as an example. She's taking all these different opportunities. She's kind of breaking down barriers. That seems to be, from what the musicians we've talked to on this podcast, the people who are making a living as a musician, that's what they do. They spread themselves across genres, across different mediums, and that seems to be what something that Berklee tries to prepare people for.
Berklee and the Boston Conservatory are big enough that there's not one model that's going to work for every student. So some students are wildly gifted at the thing they do, and that's all they want to do, and they should go do that. They should move to Brooklyn and be a straight-ahead jazz player, or they should be a producer or whatever. But the typical path of the modern musician is you don't really get to do just one thing. You may want to be a writer, a composer, songwriter. You may want to produce your own demos. You may want to promote yourself through your performances. So I think that our job is to have this smorgasbord of training and experience so that the young artist can say, this is the path I want to follow. I remember talking to the management of Betty Who. I don't know if you know her. She's a young woman who came out of here, and she had come to us as a classically trained cellist and switched over to songwriting and is really, really quite talented. And her management said, we purposely didn't have her do any live performance. We just promoted her virtually all electronically, digitally, until she got a following, and then she started performing live. It's sort of the reverse of what you'd normally think. So having watched this industry really closely my whole life, but especially since I've been here, there are many pathways to follow. So I think our job is not to prescribe one. And God forbid we try to tell everybody to be like Esperanza Spalding, because nobody is going to be like Esperanza Spalding. She is just one of the most gifted human beings to have ever been born, both musically and just in her artistic conception. But she is, I think, a role model, she and people like St. Vincent and Lucius, for how to have a sort of an authenticity that's really unique to you. I guess the observation I would make about Berklee versus the traditional music school is that the traditional school is there to teach you how to do the thing that's already been done. And what I think we're unique at is to teach you to do the thing that hasn't been done yet, and you be the pioneer of that, which is going to help you have a stronger, more important career, and takes the emphasis off technical perfection and performance, which is what conservatories worship. Really.
Right.
I've been fond of saying since I've been here, would we admit Neil Young or Bob Dylan or Laurie Anderson, or would we say, no, they're not really musical enough? Well, I know what the answer should be, but most conservatories wouldn't admit artists like that, who are, very creative, have a real distinctive sound and concept, but may not kind of fit the bill. Certainly they'd never win American Idol or The Voice. We don't want to be like that. We want to be the place that encourages and attracts the super creative person, gives them the tools, and helps them launch a career.
The toolbox is a key point because there's a difference between being a role model and a copycat. So, I saw St. Vincent several months ago at House of Blues. I was just blown away. You could see that there was an authenticity that was not contrived. You could see inside of her. And you can't just copy and do those types of things as a student to be successful, I would imagine.
No, you can't. You can certainly emulate. I think that there are certain patterns that you see of certain kinds of artists who use different techniques, both visual techniques and musical techniques. So you can observe and learn, but at some point, St. Vincent can't be copying anyone else because no one else has ever done quite what she's doing.
Right. There's a lot to your career. I'm very interested in the connection between humanitarianism and music, and how, in some ways, looking at your bio and where you started in the 80s, you can see that as a musician, you never were not a musician. In some ways, coming back full circle, I was so impressed to see some of the things you're doing with the city and some of the disadvantaged kids in the city. But it doesn't surprise me because of everything you did to begin with.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you could sort of comment on that interplay.
Well, for some reason, at the earliest age, I fell in love with music. My grandmother was a really good pianist. My mother had played trombone in the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. But outside of that, I just think I loved music. I actually wrote songs when I was a little boy, and my mother and grandmother loved them and would make me sing them all the time. So somehow I just fell in love with music at an early age. And then I had some epiphanies as sort of a middle school, high school student growing up in Georgia during the Civil Rights Movement, where music was able to bring a message to me that I think I wouldn't have gotten just through politicians or civil rights leaders about racial equality and how important that was. That gave me a critical eye of the world I was growing up in and the way it was organized. So I credit James Brown, Say It Aloud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, Sly and the Family Stone, Everyday People, and Neil Young's Southern Man as three songs that were really powerful in my, 12 to 15-year-old mind. So having had an experience of feeling enlightened and almost liberated by music, having this inherent passion for it, then seeing the world I lived in, and then broadening that beyond just racial equality in the South to poverty and hardship that people face. It set me off on this path. I sort of had this feeling in college that music wouldn't be enough. And so I went off and I did the school teaching and the refugee relief programs and things like that. But music stayed a sort of a thread of my life even as I did those things. The thing about humanitarianism is there's no simple answer. There's no silver bullet. So whatever you do, if you try to help people be healthier, you realize, wow, there's now more people on earth because they're healthier. There's less food for people to eat. Now there's poverty. You try to deal with economic development and you realize, wow, we can't get people to go to school because they're too sick. So, these things are all interconnected. So when you do that work, at some point you just step back and say, there isn't a silver bullet. What do I care about most? And I kind of hearken back to music and the role it played in my life. And I think even though a lot of musicians and artists don't fully realize it, they are one of the biggest resources we have for opening minds and hearts and getting people to care about each other.
The train slowed down on the tracks, greeted by a man in black, wrinkled lines stretched across his face. He said, you probably don't remember me. Your family left when you were 3. Now you're back in Grandpa's place.
You're a little older, broad in the shoulders. Return to the land where you come from. Been living overseas, now you're back with me. Good to have you home.
There at a broken school of humble men and mighty fools, in a world that's broken and torn. Can you find an honest man with no gravy on his hands?
I think just to drill down on the specifics of that, I saw somewhere your drive to record the Cambodian music.
Yeah. So the Khmer Rouge had basically forbidden music and musicians and saw it as a corrupting influence in society. So a lot of musicians had gone underground, some had been killed. So when I was running these refugee camps, this was really more of a personal whim at the time. I just thought, I'm starting to hear some traditional Cambodian music. What if I could get a little bit of a grant and we could record some of it? It would be fun and interesting for me as someone who loves music. But what I didn't expect was how vital and important it became to the people of this refugee camp. And these songs we recorded kind of became big hits. And you heard them everywhere, and you realized, wow, these people, we think of them as hungry for food, which they were, but culturally there's been almost 5-year starvation as well. And even though you think, well, would you rather have food or would you rather have music? Well, in an ideal world, you wouldn't have to choose. It was a revelatory experience to see how powerful bringing just a little bit of music to this community was.
It's kind of a testament to, doesn't matter what you do something.
Yeah.
You went into that thinking, it's just something I'm interested in. It might be an interesting project. And it blew up into something you had no idea that it would turn into.
Well, and I also think, to me, it said, don't overthink it. Follow your own passions and interests, and they'll lead you to a good place. I hadn't really thought too much about that experience until I got this job, and I was reflecting on my life in music, and I remembered just how serendipitous that whole experience was. And it became a metaphor for me. When we think about how do we try to make the world a better place, don't forget art, music, culture, because it's so fundamental to who we are as people. And sometimes, especially as Americans, we think in such a materialistic way. People need this and that and the other thing. They need internet access. And you think, well, really? Is that what people really need more of? Well, this is a good thing and people want it, but there are other things that I think are enriching to life.
I think what you're touching on, too, is that in the school systems, it was STEM, now it's STEAM. You put the arts in the acronym, and we try, which is a good thing. However, if you just take a step back and you're in Cambodia and you're in anywhere in the world, these are just essentials that people need.
Another story I'm fond of is this discovery of a Neanderthal-made bone flute in some cave in Germany that's 40,000 years old, so it predates Homo sapiens. So our non-human, almost human ancestors were making musical instruments. So they were making arrows and maybe spears and other things to help them stay alive, but they also made music. It just strikes me that we negate our own history and our own needs if we don't honor the arts. I mean, the good news, too, is that you can spin some apocalyptic tale about how music is being squeezed out of our education system. But my counter-argument has been the United States has probably always had the worst music education, certainly compared to Europe. But Europe listens to our music, not the other way around today. And why is that? I think it's because of garage bands, church music, clubs, honky-tonks. I mean, I want to support it more. I want more public support, especially for music education. But I also think that the idea that somehow it's going to get wiped out is just ridiculous. And again, a lot of the music we listen to didn't come out of some formal program or a big NEA grant. Yeah. In fact, most of the music we listened to would never have been funded by anyone because it was rebellious, shocking music at the time.
I want to talk a little bit about your foray into higher education. Mm-hmm. Why higher education? When you decided to come into Berklee, was it kind of an opportunity just to present it itself, or something that you always wanted to get involved in, and why not the younger student? Was there something specific there that you wanted to hit the college age student? I'm just curious.
I'd started and run a company for 16 years that my wife and I started together with some friends, Bright Horizons, which runs early childhood education programs for big employers, just named by the Boston Globe as one of the top employers in Massachusetts. So it's a really good organization.
Yeah, I've seen them.
I'd produced a bunch of children's music, which we gave away to the families who were enrolled. So I was able to keep my music going in a kind of small and subtle way. I think it really goes back to something, Chuck, you said in the beginning. I had always revered Berklee because I'm a person who loves jazz and jazz fusion, and so many of my idols had gone here. I'd studied here briefly with a really amazing drummer named Tommy Campbell, who was Kevin Eubanks' first drummer. He went to Berklee. They all met here. I mean, that was the era of Kevin Eubanks, Branford Marsalis, Terry Lynn Carrington, Smitty Smith, Tane Watts, Layla Hathaway, Donald Harrison, an amazing lineup of unbelievable musicians all here at the same time. So I got to take some lessons from Tommy, and I took them in this building, the basement of this building. I don't know, the place had always been, it had sort of a mysterious quality to me as the epicenter of American jazz and contemporary music. So I was not looking to go into higher education, and I wasn't even really looking to go into music per se, but I heard that Berklee was looking for a president, and just a light bulb went off, and I thought, this is everything I want to do. It's music, it's culture, because we have kids from 101 different countries here, and I've lived in a lot of those countries. It's entrepreneurship, because this school has always been much more entrepreneurial than your typical college, and that was something I felt like I had a skill set in. And it really has a lot to do with racial equality and giving a voice to people who in this country have historically not had one. So not only do you have the multicultural aspects of all these other countries, but especially in Boston, we're probably the most racially diverse place in the city. So it just drew me immediately. I didn't really even think about it. It's like, wow, if they would have me, I would love this job. And so I went for it.
What you've done besides certainly the online development in the last 14 years, but also I think reaching across the ocean too, to harken back to what we mentioned before about some of your past history with interesting cultures and equality, is that there's been African studies, Asian studies. You've been able to incorporate that into your presidency.
Yeah. My take on Berklee when I got here was Berklee was good at all these things, but hadn't really taken stock of how good it was or how much power it had. It was an institution that always saw itself as sort of fledgling, just barely surviving. And I looked at it and said, are you kidding me? This has become the best music school on the planet. We need to start behaving that way. So we need to embrace the things we're good at. So, Africana studies made sense right out of the blocks as something we would explicitly say we care about this. And especially for these students who come from all over the world and want to study American jazz, it's immoral to have them study jazz and not understand the cultural context in which jazz arose. Not only for their intellectual development, but so they'll be better musicians. We started a bunch of different institutes, the Global Jazz Institute, where we brought Danilo Perez back, and John Patitucci and Joe Lovano and others. The Popular Music Institute was basically an attempt to say, look, a lot of our students really just want to go into mainstream commercial popular music. And historically, it's sort of like we said, well, if they want to do that, that's fine, but how can we support them in that? And I felt like, that's crazy. That's 98% of the commercial music industry. Are we going to ignore it because we're too highbrow, which is the same attitude the classical conservatories had about jazz? Why don't we embrace it and support these young people. In fact, I think Annie Clark, St. Vincent, I actually think came through the label that Jeff Dornfeld started, which was called Dorm Sessions back in the day. So the Popular Music Institute places Berklee bands at major festivals like Lollapalooza. And they get to jump on a bus and go to Chicago and promote themselves and play in a major festival. They're not the headliner, of course, but
it's
what an opportunity.
The hands-on experience.
Yeah. And how do you get ready for that? How do you make the most of it? And then forevermore, the resume of that band says performances at Lollapalooza or Osheaga or wherever they went. So we started that. The one that we just did, which I'm really pumped about, is Terry Lynn Carrington's Institute for Jazz and Gender Justice. I think one of the biggest successes I've had since I came to Berklee was flying to Los Angeles and recruiting Terry Lynn to come back here. Because, again, I'm a drummer. Of all the drummers in the world, she's probably the one I admire most. She can play anything, and she plays with such conviction and beauty and clarity. You know, her ego's not in the way, so she can overplay when it's called for, and she doesn't overplay when it's not. And I think, you know, I've pointed this out to anyone who will listen. Boston is not well known for this, but we've produced 4 of the greatest jazz drummers in the last century: Roy Haynes, Alan Dawson, Tony Williams, and Terry Lynn Carrington. We don't beat our chest enough about that. So anyway, I got Terry to come back.
And that's part of the Jazz and Gender. She's
the founder. She's
right.
The artistic director of the Institute for Jazz and Gender Justice. And the concept there is kind of painfully obvious. Jazz was an amazing force in terms of expression for African Americans, but largely African American men. And women were systematically excluded from the music, as they were from many types of music. But Terry's idea is can we imagine a world in which we invite more young women to be jazz musicians, and what might it sound like, and how might we improve and enhance the music by making that possible? And she's also had this epiphany that it was kind of easy for her. She was the exceptional person for whom the doors opened up, but many women who try to go into jazz encounter an enormous amount of resistance, and it's hard for them. So she has had this epiphany that there's a lot she can do to pave the way for women and non-binary musicians, as well as try to say to men, you should be more open to a female voice. And she has the credibility as an artist to do that.
This is new. This is a center within Berklee
Yes.
that offers opportunities, resources, networking, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So we took $1 million of philanthropy and we applied it to this, and we're actively raising more money. And we've also hired a young woman in our liberal arts department who's an ethnomusicologist. Asia Burrell Wood is her name, and she's really talented. So she is doing what I was talking about before with Americana Studies. Not only do we want to teach them music, we want to teach the history of the music and the cultural context of the music and rethink. In fact, Asia is thinking about doing a class with a group of students who would do musicological research on jazz standards written by women that never got embraced as part of the canon because they were women, to try to recalibrate and say, hey, what did Mary Lou Williams write? And how do we have that music treated with the same respect that music that Thelonious Monk wrote is treated?
I love that this school does that. It's not something that you would have seen back when I was here. I can understand this like in just a regular academic institution. You wouldn't expect it out of musical institutions. Also, I remember when I went here, I think it only offered 2 music history classes. It was history of rock or history of jazz.
Yeah.
And now you have Mediterranean Music Institute. You have roots music.
Yeah.
Some of the most amazing musicians, they
Yeah.
changed and evolved and
Yeah.
became better musicians when they started looking at other genres and types, and you are now offering for these kids now.
I think the roots music program is one that's worth a moment of discussion, because instinctively you think, well, that must be in Nashville or Austin or someplace. But the epicenter of American roots music is in Boston, Massachusetts.
How is that?
And I don't think anybody would argue with me, even people in Nashville and other places. I'm not sure why it is. I think we deserve a little bit of credit, especially this guy named Matt Glazer, who is the chair of the string department here.
What would we say roots is?
So I would call roots old-time, blues, bluegrass, and other musics that existed in the early part of the 19th and early part of the 20th century.
All right.
You could argue that early jazz would be in that, but we have so much focus on jazz. It's really for, I would say, blues and blues-derived musics. Folk music would certainly be in that category.
And Americana came out of that as well.
Americana is just a nice name that encapsulates a lot of that.
Yeah.
It has a long history, and I think right now not only are there a ton of Americana roots musicians at Berklee, I've met several who just moved to Boston because there's so many other people here. It's become a scene, so even if you're not in school, and there's some people at NEC who do a similar kind of thing, like Aifa O'Donovan, who went there, and Sarah Jaros. So the combination of what's happened at Berklee, NEC, and just the scene that we've created is really vibrant. We get these killer musicians, and another cool phenomenon is a lot of people come here as jazz musicians, and they hear this stuff and they say, I like that. That's the unique role that we should be playing, is to create a home for musicians to come and create and innovate. And I don't necessarily want them to sound like Bill Monroe or Earl Scruggs. If they want to, again, that's fine. But what we should do is give them the platform to say, well, what would the 21st century version of Bill Monroe and Earl Scruggs be?
Do you think there's anything about Boston and its history and the location and the Northeast that brings all that together?
I do know there's a long tradition through Passim and some other venues of sort of a root scene. Lizard Lounge has a root scene.
Sure.
I think what happened in some ways is that folk and bluegrass got rediscovered by intellectuals. Right now, if you have a prominent banjo player, he or she is more likely to come from Manhattan than they are from, East Tennessee. Tony Triska and Bela Fleck, I think, are both from New York City.
Interesting.
Dave Grisman from New Jersey. I think that some of it may have to do with that. I don't know. But someone smarter than me would have to help you answer that question.
Recently, we just talked to Cara Elliott Ortega. She's the Chief of Arts and Culture at City Hall. One of the major initiatives that she has taken on is to make sure that it's a diverse and inclusive range of arts. It's also including all the different areas of Boston. And I was really impressed. Like that was the first thing she said. Their main goal is to make sure we're inclusive of everybody.
Yeah. I think with sort of the traditional New England arts institutions, there's a tendency to forget those populations. I have to say, I think we've been a leader in recognizing them. We brought a bunch of great Brazilian artists here, and there's a massive turnout from the greater New England area. We have the Tito Puente series every summer with a bunch of great Latin American students and faculty. Cape Verdean music. We do a lot in terms of trying to touch communities that might otherwise have been forgotten. We brought Bill Whelan here to do his river dance stuff and reach out specifically to the Irish community. So I think it's critical. And I think, again, that's part of what makes Boston unique, is that it is such a polyglot city, and the musics of all these places are fascinating.
Well, right, and we've brought up a couple times in this. Mary Gaucher, I think, had this great line of, it's one of the most liberal, segregated cities in the world, and it is both. I mean, and you try to bring people together. I think what you just mentioned, it sort of reminds me of if you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have people in a theater, not just programs, but you actually have Brazilian music in a theater, you're not just going to bring 90% white people that are interested in Brazilian music. You're going to get Brazilians.
Yeah. There's a real divide in the art world, which simplistically is between the nonprofit art world and the for-profit art world. If you bring a popular Brazilian musician, you're likely to get the Brazilian population. If you bring an art-oriented Brazilian musician, you're likely to get the intelligentsia, which is likely to be more lily-white audience. So I think some of it is actually being willing to take some programming risks and say, let's get the music that people really want to listen to, not the music we think they should want to listen to.
This is anthropological. I mean, you have to know the cultures.
But you don't have to know them that much. I mean, it's not that hard. You just have to say, who is happening now in Colombia or Brazil or someplace? And like Juan Luis Guerra is a Berklee alum from the Dominican Republic. Man, he can sell out a show in Boston. He always says, where are people from? And it's largely Dominican and Puerto Rican. They sing every lyric of every song that man sings. That, to me, is the answer. Find people who are both really talented musically and operate at a pretty sophisticated level, but have some popular appeal.
I'm going to punt the beginning of my question to you because this is your forte.
Okay.
But as we mentioned before, you have a music and health series here. And we actually even talked to a woman who was getting her master's, I believe, in music therapy. Was that correct? I don't know how recently that's been an offering here at Berklee, but certainly, I mean, Ron, if you want to talk to it, this is something that you're involved in a great deal as well.
I've been musical or a musician my whole life, and I've been very interested in songwriting and healing of music. I'm a physician at Mass General and Spalding Rehab, and we have a connection with Berklee, with the music therapy department, and specifically neurologic music therapy. You know, the timing is right, the interest is there, the technology is ripe, from functional imaging to everything else, and this town fosters all of that. So I think we're very lucky to be one in this city, to combine the academics between music and health. Is that where you're going with Chuck?
Yeah.
Just to hear about some sort of where it's going, what are some of the top level goals, I guess?
I'm really excited about the connection of music in the mind and music and health. I'm not a physician, but as an amateur observer, I think we've learned a lot about cognition and the brain and the connection between the brain and the rest of the body, and the way that even things like trauma get physically embedded in the body and cause all kinds of symptomatic problems that could potentially be assisted or helped in some way by music and music therapy. We've long had one of the best music therapy departments in the country. Okay. It's a little overshadowed by the Esperanza Spaldings and the Imagine Dragons of the world because, you know, those artists are so famous. But our music therapists are out there doing amazing work in all sorts of walks of life, some as direct practitioners, some as researchers. Stress in music. Pain. There's some really seminal studies that look at the amount of opioids that people self-administer when they're in pain, and they administer fewer when they're listening to music. And I used the example in that talk of my own mother who's approaching her 90th birthday, and I hired a Berklee music therapist to go once a week and spend an hour with her playing music. And it has made such a difference in her mental state, her memory, her cognition. You know, she's got dementia, and it's not going to be reversed, but the quality of her life has been improved so dramatically by these visits. A funny story about her, I also bought her some CDs that she's been listening to, and she's fallen in love with that old folk song, Tom Dooley.
That was the very first guitar song I ever learned.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah, Tom Dooley.
And every time I talk to her, she says, "Is that real? Did Tom Dooley really kill that young girl? And why did he do that?" So I did some homework. Apparently it's based on a real story.
Really? I'm not surprised.
Of a returning Confederate soldier whose girlfriend had married somebody else. So anyway, she's just fascinated by this whole song, and it gives us this rich conversation that we wouldn't have had otherwise. So, the Barr Foundation is a partner in this. So you think about, what is Boston famous for? Higher education, healthcare, Research One institutions, and music. So is there a way to combine all those? This feels like the perfect example of a collaboration with, Mass Eye and Ear, MGH, Harvard Medical School, MIT, all the people doing work around cognition and neuroscience. So we're not quite sure where it will take us. And we're pretty sure we're not going to try to become a Research One institution, but our students could be involved in research projects, and then it could help inform their practice.
Yeah, there's really a cross-pollination that is very special to have a top-notch music school that is not just offering music. It's offering students that have a passion for healing and for healthcare. These all blur these lines. Yeah. And so I think having that Berklee musicianship within the hospitals, and then having the healthcare / scientists that can teach and be involved in Berklee is just a nice circle that can help out each other.
And how many physicians and scientists do you know who are amateur musicians themselves?
Yeah.
A lot. Love music.
More than you realize. Absolutely. You just got to ask.
I think it's got a huge amount of promise for us. And we have a board member, a guy named Steve Holtzman, who runs a biotech company called Decibel Therapeutics.
Oh, yeah.
Which is trying to help those of us with tinnitus and hearing loss figure out ways to recover our hearing.
Yeah, I like that.
So if that company can succeed, a lot of us are going to be happy. But he's been a real force behind this because he's totally embedded in the biotech community, and he knows how much interest there is and reverence for Berklee in that community. So again, it's a way to unify what Boston is so good at.
I want to get a little more personal. And so you're a drummer.
I am.
And from what your bio says, you are an avocational drummer. Are you in a band? Do you play out? Do you how much drumming are you doing right now?
I'm in a band. We do play occasionally. We play a lot at my church.
Okay.
Around the Berklee community, I'm purposely very visibly humble about my skills as a drummer, because on our faculty are people like Omar Hakim and Kenwood Denard and Casey Sherrill. Some of the best drummers on the planet, and many of the best drummers on the planet studied here. Compared to them, I'm an average, mediocre drummer, but I love it. And I've always thought to myself, just because you're not LeBron James doesn't mean you can't enjoy pickup basketball.
Right.
So,
is there a stylistic thing that you're proud of that you gravitate towards? Or
that's a good question. Well, the older I've gotten, the simpler I've gotten, and I think most people would say the better it sounds. Because if you're not a Steve Smith or a Kenwood Denard or a Terry Lynn Carrington, probably best to just lay down a nice pocket. I have a teacher here, Jackie Santos, who has played with Beaver Brown and Tavares and a bunch of great bands, and he's really good at just teaching me some real simple things that have improved my playing a lot. So yeah, I think that ordinary people listening to my band play music like it. And I like playing it, and that's sort of enough for me. And then, of course, I'm in a luxurious situation here where I can ask people to play with me, and most of the time they'll say yes.
Sorry, Mr. President, I'm busy.
Exactly.
Yeah, you get a lot of that.
I've had
probably.
a few people say that, and I didn't press them too hard, but I just got to sit in with LL Cool J at our gala. That was fun.
Yeah?
I got to play Big Bottom with Christopher Guest when we honored him. I've played with John Patitucci and Steve Bailey. So I've got a few things on my resume that wouldn't have been there had I not been in this job.
Big Bottom is not on many people's resume. So, you have a lot of things to be excited about for Berklee. I couldn't be more impressed with what I've just seen, just even just walking around the neighborhood now. What are you excited about next?
The thing that we are most focused on is that we are preparing young people for a field that, 3 fields now really, acting, dance, and music with the merger of Boston Conservatory. And we're very good at it, and our alumni probably have a better chance of success than alumni from any other institution. But it's going to be a complicated path. So my goal is to try to dramatically reduce the amount of debt people have when they graduate, try to make it more affordable for people who don't come from affluent families, and make sure we are giving students the best tools and skills and also mindset that they're more likely to be successful. What I like to say to parents is, I can't promise you success. Our alumni win more Grammys than anybody else, but I can almost guarantee you your son or daughter will not be one of them.
Right.
Because that's still a very, very small number. However, behind every one of those Grammy winners is a producer, an engineer, an arranger, a manager, a booking agent, someone who's done live sound. So the odds of being in one of those jobs are actually quite high if you come to our school. But I want to start earlier with our career center. I want to bring more people to campus who can create jobs and offer internships to students. I want to have more scholarship and financial aid for students who need it than we have currently. We've been able to bring the average amount of debt per student down by about 20% over the last 5 years, but it's still way too much. And especially if you think about the freelance careers our students are entering, any kind of debt burden is going to get in the way of you being able to achieve your dreams. So I think that's the next frontier for us. In addition to we got a few cool things up our sleeve. We have this new micro campus in New York City at the Power Station Recording Studio, where Like a Virgin was recorded, and Born in the USA, and Let's Dance, and all these seminal records. Virtually every studio record Pat Metheny's ever made has been done there. Esperanza recorded there. So I want to see us figure out how to use that as a sort of platform for our students who want to live and work in New York to get a toehold there.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, you're the 120th episode.
Yes, 120.
That we've had since June of 2016. I mention that specifically because our first guest is a Berklee grad from 1994 named Alison Keslow, who's a very good friend of ours. She's a bassist and a jazz cat, and she teaches. She's great. But she really started a Berklee appreciation for me in the mid-'90s when I was living here. And anyway, and on the podcast, we've had about 10%, I think, have been ahead of Berklee connection of some sort.
We should do better than that.
So,
probably a little higher, but we'll work on it.
I think of 120 beats per minute. That's sort of the tempo of a lot of dance music. So I'm proud to be 120.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, my pleasure.
The train slowed down on the tracks, greeted by a man in black. wrinkled lines stretched across his face. He said you probably don't remember me. Your family left when you were 3. Now you're back in Grandpa's place.
You're a little older, broad in the shoulders. Return to the land where you come from. Been living overseas, now you're back with me. Good to have you home.
There at a broken school of humble men and mighty fools, in a world that's broken and poor. Can you find an honest man with no gravy on his hands? The leaders we wait for have not yet been born. I'm a little older, got a chip on my shoulder, really no idea where I belong. I'm living overseas when the message came to me, Grandma is gone, time to come home. Fetch the water, light the fire, share a meal with me. We'll talk together, your adventures and your history. Grandson, won't you follow me to the whole Maguma tree? Listen as I share a family song. Your people came from far away, settling this found place many generations ago. Yes, you're a little older, but a chip on your shoulder would help you understand where you belong. You've been overseas, but now you're here with me. You wonder where you're from, a family beautiful and strong.
We would like to thank Alan Bush at Berklee for facilitating this episode, and of course Roger for sitting with us. You can learn more about Berklee and what it has to offer at berklee.edu. Go to abovethebasement.com, where you can join us on Patreon, sign up for our newsletter, listen and subscribe to our podcast, like our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter, and look at all the nice pictures we post on Instagram. We are everywhere. On behalf of Ronnie and myself, thanks for listening. Tell your friends, and remember, Boston music, like its history, is unique.
Sound marks the hours, you must feel your power.
How do I know the sun shines for me?
The sun is like a father, beating us forever, giving us light, setting us free.
Oh, the beautiful one. Yeah. Oh, the beautiful ones.
How would you like to join us in creating great conversations that inspire and connect? Patreon is a membership platform that provides a way for creators like us to build relationships and provide exclusive experiences to subscribers or patrons. We have been self-financed since we got off the ground in June of 2016, but in order to continue to fully invest all we can in each episode, we need your patronage. For more information, please go to patreon.com/above the basement.